Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I came across something that I thought might be helpful. Um, in it pops up here and there, sort of everywhere, but in the Vajra Kalaya practice and many of the sadhanas, many of the tantric practices that involve mantras. At a certain point in the progression, you might say, there's purification where we recite the Sanskrit vowels and consonants 3 times as a speech purification, and then repeat the Vajrasattva mantra as a mind purification. And then we recite this Dharani. I'm not quite sure what the definition of Dharani is. They're kind of like sacred speech, but unlike a mantra, not emanating, you might say, from a Buddha. Let me see if I can find a definition here. Short one. No, I don't have one. But at any rate, in the sadhanas, and for instance, specifically in our Vajrakalaya practice, the Om Ye Dharma. You see this if you go to Varanasi, where the Buddha first taught. There's a Sri Lankan temple there. And above the main entrance door, it just says O Ye Dharma, Om Ye Dharma, because it's referring to that. See if I can remember it. Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava He Tutam Kam. Tesham Tathagata Hayavada Tesham Chaya Naroda Ewamwadi Mahashramana Yesoha. So you'll recognize that. So they put an Om and a Sva at the beginning and a Svaha at the end, which kind of turns it into a Dharani and notes its sacredness. So this Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetum Tesham Tathagato Hayavada Tesham Chayo Niroda Ewamadi Maha Shramana is the actual statement of someone. So I just wanted to tell the story of this because I find it rather remarkable, that this is passed down now for 2,600 years. And why are we saying this? Well, it's said that this verse in particular contains the essence of the whole teaching of the Buddha. Originally a simple stanza, it's recited as a dharani or mantra by the addition of Om at the beginning and Svaha at the end. And again, of course, Om is referring to many, many things, but Om is the Dharmakaya, the essence, the vastness, and Svaha is this. It's sort of like the Amen of Buddhism, Svaha, but it's a statement of kind of wonder and joy also, which I think is kind of interesting. Again, my daughter was taking a course in Sanskrit. She had a wonderful teacher at Harvard, and at one point it wasn't a Buddhist course; they were just learning Sanskrit, and they came across this phrase, which was the description of what you would say if you saw a tremendously outfitted war elephant coming, just this fantastic creature, and Svaha. It was like, that's what you say. And Megan, the teacher, defined it as sort of like, damn. So svaha. Anyway, Dharanis or mantras are often written down and placed inside stupas and sacred statues. Yes. And then this article writes it out in the Sanskrit. But the translation of this is this: all dharmas, this means appearances, small d, all dharmas originate from causes. The Tathagata has taught these causes, and also that which puts a stop to these causes. This too has been taught by the great Shramana. And what's a Shramana? Shramana is a wandering yogi monk type in ancient India. So these verses come from the Vinaya collection. So again, in classical Buddhism, you had what are called the three baskets. The teachings of the sutra, that is the spoken words, recorded spoken words of the Buddha. Then there's the basket of the Abhidharma, which are like the higher philosophical teachings, instructions, and then the basket of the Vinaya. The Vinaya were the rules of conduct and organization for monks, nuns, and lay people, both, including the rules of a monastery or organization. In ancient India, the Buddhists were given special kind of privilege by the local kings, the Rajas, in that these monasteries were self-governing entities. Rather remarkable. Nonetheless, the verses come from the Vinaya. So this is the rules of comportment, beginning with Ye Dharma Heta Prabhava, and are the words spoken by the Arhat, Asaji, whose Sanskrit name is Ashvajit. So when the Buddha first taught, he taught to 4 disciples, his 5 former co-practitioners who had abandoned him when they saw him take the rice milk and abandon the path of extreme asceticism. Ashvajit was one of those 5. And so later, when the Buddha, after his enlightenment, went to Varanasi, and these 5 ascetics were practicing there, and they saw him coming. They hadn't seen him for a while, a few months, and they, amongst themselves, they sort of took this understanding that they would not stand in respect to who they thought was Gautama when he arrived. And of course, this is a very radical thing in India, ancient India. I mean, again, these kind of, very strict and almost kind of like sacred kind of social conventions are not so strong in a society like ours. But in India, to not stand when your teacher, your former practitioner together entered, it's a very kind of almost courageous and stubborn thing to do, a very strong statement. And yet, when they thought Gautama, but now Shakyamuni, this Buddha, approached them, despite themselves, they all stood up because they were so moved by his just, incredible dignity and depth. And one of the first things they said was, Gautama, what's happened to you? And he said, you can't call me that anymore because I am a Buddha. And so hence the title Shakyamuni Buddha, the silent sage of the Shakya clan, the Tathagata, the thus come one, the Bhagavan, all these various appellations. But nonetheless, Ashvajit was one of those 5. And when they talked a little bit and then they sat down to meditate and then he started to teach, they all came to enlightenment. Such was the power. So these words, this Ye Dharma, Hetu Prabhava, etc., are the words spoken by the Arhat Ashvajit to Upatissa, who was later known as Shariputra in Sanskrit, Shariputra. So Shariputra there'll be more to be said about him, but Shariputra, Putra means son, and Shari means crow. Linguists who have analyzed this have said that he was this kind of recognized some sort of maternal transmission in some clan or sect or whatever. Thank you. In ancient India. So Shariputra was the son of Shari. Shari, who was his mother's name, the name of his mother's lineage. And Shariputra ended up being, as you'll see, one of the 10 great disciples of the Buddha. But nonetheless, this words spoken by the Arhat, Ashvajit, to Shariputra, along with Shariputra's boyhood companion, Kolita, known later as Maudgalyayana, who were to become the two chief disciples of the Buddha. Upon meeting Asajit, Shariputra was impressed and asked after his teacher, who was your teacher? And what was the Dharma that your teacher taught? And Asajit demurred, claiming to be only a beginner. Remember, he's an Arhat. But eventually responded with this now famous verse. And even before he had finished reciting it, Shariputra had a decisive breakthrough. As one modern bhikshu historian writes, upon hearing the first two lines, there arose in the wanderer, Shariputra, the dust-free, stainless vision of the Dharma, the first glimpse of the deathless, the path of the stream entry, so entering into the stream, the enlightened stream of our mind. And after hearing the final two lines, Shariputra was already listening as a stream enterer. So that is someone who has entered the stream and then with further progress becomes a non-returner, someone who cannot fall back into samsara. So how did this happen? Well, this was in Rajgir. You can go there today. Rajgir is where Vulture Peak is, where Buddha taught both the Amitabha Sutra and the Amitaya Sutra, rather, on the Pure Land. And he also taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra there, the Heart Sutra especially. So Shariputra and his cousin, Maudgalyayana, were on a quest. They were trying to find an enlightened teacher. And this happened in Rajgir, and they both took a vow that whoever they separated, whoever could find an enlightened teacher would come tell the other one, and then they would practice together. Very strong karma, obviously. And it was Maudgalyayana who was just out in the hoi polloi in Rajgir, and he noticed Ashvajit. And he was so, again, taken by his comportment and just seemed to be the peace that was around him that he asked him, who are you? And who are your teacher? Who is your teacher? And what does he teach? And that's what prompted this verse. And so as he listened to it, as this is related, he came to enlightenment listening to these words. The Buddha teaches the cause and teaches the elimination of the cause. It's that simple. And of course, the result being suffering. So it's this, and you can see the kind of almost like scientific approach to this. I mean, vast cause and effect. It's just something that seems very impersonal about it. Because we're just talking about reality, but the reality that is occluded, that is not apparent to us because of our self-grasping. We grasp and kind to really appropriate the appearances instead of looking at them cleanly. We look at them through the lens of what's in it for me. Is this good or bad? Do I reject it? Do I accept it? Am I just neutral because it doesn't really affect my ego, whatever? So he went back and he found Maudgalyayana, and they both, eventually found the Buddha and became bhikshus, took refuge. And as the tradition says, they were two of the 10 great disciples of the Buddha. Shariputra was regarded as being second to Buddha in wisdom. So he was especially had a role of teaching the monks, and especially the new monks. Madhgalyayana was known for his great psychic powers. Yeah, very interesting. But anyway, we repeat this in the Vajrakalaya. That's what we're saying again and again and again. Like they say, the essence of Buddhism. This great monk, the great Shramanara, knows the cause. He teaches the cause. What is the cause? And then also the elimination of the cause. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, after he passed away, we should probably check on this, but I think it was after the Buddha as parinirvana that in their later practice, I think Madhgalyayana was actually murdered. So, for us who think that this is sort of just the path of easy path and bliss, and isn't this wonderful? It's always been practicing in samsara can trigger certain things for sure. There's so much misunderstanding and willful misunderstanding. That's kind of the part that's tough. Okay, so that's on Shariputra and Madhgalyayana. Then also, I thought I'd go over because it comes up. Khenpo has taught, for instance, several times, and he mentions it often on Sundays. We talk about the path, the 5 paths. You hear this a lot. This path of accumulation, and it's all divided out, many, many sub paths to it, but it gives you a structure for the path of development. And I think it's very helpful because, again, it's like all the conceptual teachings have the effect of giving you something to sort of bite into in our usual kind of dualistic conceptual way. And so this is really good because the teaching is that the Dharma is not other than what we're seeing, so to speak. This is so important. This is the greatness of the Mahayana, that, a Buddha is not someone who is completely aloof, completely apart from the suffering of human beings, but rather like the image of the lotus growing out of the mud and yet being above it, completely fragrant, unfolding slowly with a tremendous fragrance, which is its compassion. So too, in this description of the path, it's just very, very helpful for settling the mind. Instead of this constant wandering around and grabbing one concept and another, suddenly there's a path that you can analyze, that you can work on, and that also is like guideposts on our path. So when we're too off the path, we recognize, conceptually, this doesn't seem to be right. So these are very helpful things. So that it's like the great compassion of the Buddha. All his teachings came out of his great awakening. And yet the challenge, I think, of communication, how do you communicate to deluded beings? I mean, that's just a tremendous accomplishment. But there you go, this teaching on the path. So he starts with the path of accumulation. Now, what does that mean? Is that the mind, having discovered the Four Noble Truths, having discovered the fact of dissatisfaction and suffering, that we're not going to fix it in these egotistic ways. It just can't work that way. It's our egotistic lens that's creating all the suffering in the first place. So that's where we have to go. So then we understand the cause, we understand the path, and we have confidence in this. This then becomes the first great path, the path of accumulation. So what does that mean? It means that a formerly completely deluded mind has understood, as a glimmer of the path, And instead of just our energies going out in a million different directions, instead now it becomes focused. And in the Mahayana path, of course, it's focused on virtue. On the Hinayana path, it's focused on just staying away from non-virtue, the self-liberation path, just staying away from non-virtue. But for the first time, there's, like you might say, a directionality. There is a path. Now, this leads to the path of application. It's as if this now formerly scattered mind, has some power, and now the power, the increased power of the mind, is now used to start looking into the nature of the mind. This is the path of application. That's the second path. Now, this leads to the third path, which is the path of insight. So there's actually an insight into the nature of the mind. And this then leads to the fourth path, which is the path of meditation or development, sometimes it's called. So this is where you hear Khenpo talking about the bhumis. This is where the 10 bhumis, the 10 levels of a noble being are, the 10 levels of an enlightened being. This is like deep enlightenment, more than just mere insight. But nonetheless, that's not to denigrate the insight, occasional insight either. And leading to no more path, which is Buddhahood, of course. So again, this goes back very much, and Khenpo has referred to this numbers of times, but we've never really gotten into it in much detail. But I thought I might read some of this from Edward Kanze. He does both the path according to self-liberation and the path according to the Mahayana. And I think you'll see how remarkable this is. I mean, really how, profound. Let's see. Yeah, this is just a slight section from a longer chapter leading up to it. He takes this from the Abhidharma Kosha, which is this famous text. Distinguishes 5 stages of the path. First one is the path. This is self-liberation, in which the initial equipment is gradually accumulated. Then follows the path of endeavor, which I called application, which is defined as the process of training, which directly precedes the entrance into the supermundane path. He has further developments there. But so this is followed by path 3, which I called the path of meditation. He's calling it the path of vision, which is the supramundane vision of the Four Truths, in which wisdom is exercised free from outflows, free from perverted views, free from passions, and occupies itself within the general marks, the qualities of the Four Noble Truths in their 16 aspects, and gradually eliminates the intellectual defilements which can be abandoned by right view. So this path of meditation is divided into 15 thought moments. Think of this. The first, which is called the acceptance of the First Noble Truth, the acceptance of the fact of dissatisfaction, deals with ill in the world of sense desire. At this point, the yogi becomes convinced that without any doubt, all dharmas appearances in the world of sense desire are impermanent, ill, empty, and without self. By forsaking his doubts about this proposition and abandoning the passions which follow from holding the opposite to be true. And those are the perversions. Perversion is this ancient word, which means upside down. A cart that is tipped over is said to be perverted. And what does it mean? It means that we look out in this world of appearances, and instead of seeing things as impermanent, they appear to us as if they're permanent. Instead of being dissatisfactory, they appear to us as just being, the bee's knees. That's what we want. And instead of appearing as empty and without self and a solid existence apart from anything else, standing on its own, independent of everything else, we see things as being in that way. So these are the perverted views. So the yogi enters the first path, becomes an Arya, a noble being, and is now certain that one day he will win nirvana. This is on the path of meditation or vision. This insight is completed by a firm conviction of the impermanence, ill, and of all dharmas in the world of sense desire, and a deliverance which gives possession of the stopping of those passions, since all those passions are based on this wrong view. By having an experience of the truth of the view to some degree, the passions are destroyed. He also deals with the dissatisfactory nature of the world of form and with that of the formless world. So again, when we talk about the three realms, sometimes there's the realm of sense desire, which is what we and the animals and the hungry ghosts and the hell beings and the Asuras and the lower sense gods are all involved in this. Everything is desire. We all want to get somewhere. And then above this is the realm of form, which is subtle form, you might say. These are the higher God realms. And above that, the formless, the stations of Brahma, they're called. Very, very subtle, but still samsaric mind. All right. So this insight deals with the ill of the world of form and also with that of the formless world. So instead of aspiring rather to, some sort of a heaven or some sort of a just formless world, just as an escape from everything, neither perception nor non-perception. Instead of that, the passions connected with the false view of individuality are now destroyed. But others are left, and love, hate, the desire for pleasant feelings, and so on, still trouble the yogi. So isn't this remarkable? This great insight, and yet what's left? Love, hate, and the desire for pleasant feelings, still there. So this takes us to the path 4, the path of development, of which the first step is the 16th thought moment, which considers the path in relation to the formless world. This is highly technical, but it shows you just how amazingly developed this teaching is. We loosely say the 5 paths, and we never talk about the breakdown of it. And this again is self-liberation. This is not the Mahayana description of the path. So this corresponds, the 16th thought moment, which considers the path in relation to the formless world. This corresponds to the first fruit. From now on, deliverance is certain. And after no more than 7 lives, nirvana will be reached. In the further course of this path, one reaches the condition of a once returner, who will be reborn only once in the world of sense desire, and also the state of a never returner, who will never again be reborn in it. And that is what Shariputra attained while he listened to Ashvajit. This path is further subdivided into 80 moments in which the remaining defilements are gradually removed. First 9 for the world of sense desire, then 36 mind moments for the heavens, corresponding to the 4 dhyanas, or very samadhis, and 35 corresponding to the 4 formless attainments. Then follows finally the fifth path, the path of the adept, where the weakest defilements relating to the summit of existence are eliminated. The entrance into it is marked by the adamantine, the Vajrapama, concentration, which represents a sudden illumination by which the candidate is changed into an adept. Now he is delivered of all possible defilements, kleshas, and impurities, ashravas. This path is also known as the Vishega Marga, and the saint is now an arhat, in possession of the two cognitions characteristics of arhats. At this point, they have for their object the summit of existence, the most refined level of reality to which the arhat is still tied. When a man dies from a poisoned wound, the poison which had first invaded the entire body is at the moment of death concentrated in the wound itself. Just so, before the very end, the cognition of the yogi is concentrated on the last object he must abandon, that is, the skandhas, and he considers ill which impresses him there as well as its origin. Two things are significant about this scheme, which became the starting point of Mahayana thinking on the subject. First, without any close relation to actual experience, traditional categories are arranged into a neat scheme by way of mathematical permutations. Two, interest centers on the latter rather than the earlier stages. While there is practically no information about the aids to penetration, that's the beginning of this path, much space is devoted in the text to the meticulous distinction of dozens of kinds of arhats and never returners. The Abhidharma Kosha treatment of the stages of the path is not a guide to action, but to the reverent contemplation of the achievement of others. So anyway, that's the self-liberation path, according to the Abhidharma Kosha. Now, let's take a step into the Mahayana and see the further development of this, using the same kind of structure, but giving it, I think, a more profound meaning. Most obvious difference between the Hinayana and the Mahayana schemes lies in that the Hinayana, map out the stages leading to arhatship. The second, those which lead a bodhisattva to Buddhahood. So again, in this verse that the Omya Dharma, Ashvajit was an arhat. Those 5 practitioners of the Buddha came to arhatship the first time they heard him speak. Arhatship. The Mahayana evolved a scheme of first 7, later on 10 stages, 10 bhumis. The word bhumi, as used by the Mahayanist, may mean either level or stage. In the first sense, level, we have the 3 levels of the disciples, which is the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the lonely Buddhas, solitary Buddhas, and the Buddhas themselves. So Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Buddhas. These levels are parallel, and each leads to its own form of enlightenment. In the sense of a stage, bhumis meaning stage, it denotes either A, the 7 successive stages of the Hinayana, which end in arhatship, or the 10 successive stages of the Mahayana, which end in Buddhahood. Or C, some particularly important phase of a bodhisattva's career, like the irreversible stage, or the stage of a beginner, the stage of a crown prince, that is the last birth of a bodhisattva, the stage where meditational quietude and wise insight are in perfect equilibrium, and so on. And it is the sense of B, the 10 successive stages of the Mahayana, which end in Buddhahood, that we will consider here. The literature on the subject is fairly rich. The 2 most authoritative sources are the Dashabhumika Sutra and Chandrakirti's Mahadmakyavatara. There is agreement on all essentials, and given 10 bhumis, their actual distribution was almost inevitable. The Mahavastu states expressly that, quote, it is by taking the perfect Buddha Shakyamuni as a type that the 10 bhumis are explained. From the Jataka tales and other biographical documents about the lives of the Bodhisattva who would later become Buddha Shakyamuni, 4 fixed points stood out in his career. First, the prediction of Dipankara, that's the previous Buddha who predicted the Buddhahood of who would later become Shakyamuni. 2, the stage in which he became irreversible. 3, his sojourn in the Tushita heavens. And of course, 4, the attainment of Buddhahood. The 10th stage would be that of a fully developed Tathagata, that is, of a Buddha after his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. The 9th bhumi would be the last life of the Bodhisattva before his enlightenment, corresponding to the time between his descent from Tushita to his defeat of Mara and the insights he thereafter gained under the Bodhi tree. The 1st bhumi would mark the beginning of his career as a Bodhisattva in the time of Dipankara, when he resolved to win enlightenment for himself and for all beings. In other words, when he had his first thought of enlightenment. The first 6 bhumis could well be coordinated with the 6 perfections, in the sense that the practice of one of them dominates each stage. This leaves one further item to be fitted in, that is, the moment had to be determined when a bodhisattva would be irreversible. This topic of irreversibility aroused a quite extraordinary interest around the beginning of our era. Like other Buddhist key terms, the word irreversible is not without its ambiguities. It means, 1, a condition in which a person can no more be reborn in the states of woe, i.e. in the hells, or among animals or ghosts, lower realms. For he has become so pure that he has no affinity with these forms of life, is no longer drawn to them, does no more fall into them. Or 2, it means that one cannot lapse from any of the bhumis one has attained, does not ever again lose a given spiritual achievement or aptitude. Like everyone else, the Buddhists seem to have longed for a definitive achievement, a definite achievement, which cannot again be lost. And they attempted to define the practices which would ensure the yogi against the future loss of what he had attained. And then 3, irreversibility means a condition in which a bodhisattva is inevitably bound to become a Buddha, either because he has been predicted by a Buddha who preceded him, as Shakyamuni by Dipankara, or because he's incapable of switching over to the methods of salvation practiced by the Arhats and the Pratyeka Buddhas, and for that reason is unable to give up the quest for perfect enlightenment. In the huge literature on the attributes of an irreversible bodhisattva, these 4 meanings are not always very clearly distinguished. The scheme of the bhumis is concerned with the meaning and locates this event normally in the 7th or 8th stage. So in other words, we have these 10 bhumis, right? And it's taught that on the 1st, 7th, or 8th, depending which text you believe, one is purifying of the kleshas. One is purifying the afflictive emotions. And this is where there is a teaching that on one bhumi, you're just purifying the first perfection of giving, and the second one, the perfection of ethics, and in the third one, the perfection of patience. So they have all of this, but interestingly, you get to the 7th or 8th bhumi, all the afflictions are gone, and what remains are it's kind of like the residue of us practicing these afflictions, being tormented by them and motivated by them for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So there's like this just like stain, you might say. You know, you've washed the cloth, but there's still kind of a ring there. You heard the example of, it's like we've got a box, a wooden box, and there's a cloth that's soaked in perfume, and that's been in that box for a very long time. Removing the kleshas is removing the cloth. The grossness is gone, but the smell lingers. Those are the mental habits that still have to be purified in the higher bhumis. Once the bodhisattva has become irreversible from full enlightenment, he is in virtual possession of the qualities of a Buddha. So sometimes we hear about 10th level bodhisattva. Chenrezig, for instance, some Avalokiteshvara sometimes is said to be Buddha. We take empowerment for Chenrezig as a Buddha. But in other texts, he's said to be a 10th level bodhisattva, slightly relatable in a human way. His acquisition of Buddhahood is now quite definite, and the bodhisattva is no longer free to deviate from his goal, nor have outward circumstances the power to prevent him from reaching it. On the sixth stage, the bodhisattva has fully comprehended the wisdom teachings, which reveal everywhere one emptiness. At this point, his position is equivalent to that of the arhat, in that no more need to be done, in that he could withdraw from the scene and enter nirvana. Sixth level. His compassion, co-equal with his wisdom, prevents him, however, from immediately taking this step and induces him to postpone entry into nirvana. One reason that we don't criticize people on the self-liberation path is that you never know a person's attainment. And the arhat, up to the sixth level until the seventh level of the bhumis, can be more deeply realized than the bodhisattva on the path. He spends the remaining bhumis in the practice of skill and means, upaya, entirely devoted to the welfare of others. On the 8th and 9th stages in particular, he becomes one of those celestial bodhisattvas who played such a big role in the popular piety of the Mahayana. That is Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, Maitreya, bodhisattvas of the 10th stage. These saviors were an innovation of the first century of our era. The addition of 3 extra bhumis to the original 7 served the purpose of finding a place for them in the scheme of the path, and the meticulous descriptions of the mentality of the celestial bodhisattvas provided a philosophical foundation for the popular cult. While halting for a while at the threshold of nirvana, the bodhisattva abides, as it were, within the doors to deliverance, and his outlook is entirely governed by the old triad of emptiness, signlessness, wishless. While the 7th bhumi he ended with the 7th bhumi, he ended his active life, which had up to then been marked by effort and intellectual activity. From now on, he takes no longer the slightest interest in any particular event and dwells permanently in the trance of cessation, nirodha. He sees no more any being or dharma and is irrevocably convinced that nothing whatsoever has been produced, ever. Both his wisdom and his compassion have become infinite. The wisdom because content with emptiness, the compassion because the wisdom is infinite because content with emptiness, the compassion because it's exercised without object or effort, quite mechanically, without any notions of I or mine. It may be objected that a person who pays no attention to sense objects will be unable to live for long. This is no problem, however, for the celestial bodhisattva who has no solid, putra, and perishable body, but a dharmic body, which is issued from the Dharmadhatu, and which has the ability to conjure up fictitious physical bodies, which go to all parts of the world so they can emanate. Endowed with this dharmic body and a mind entirely governed by wisdom and compassion, the bodhisattva has won sovereignty over the universe. He works without effort like the moon, the sun, a wishing jewel, or the 4 primary elements. The Dashabhumika Sutra illustrates the effortlessness by comparing it to a great seafaring boat. When the boat is not yet at sea, much labor is needed to make it go forward, but as soon as it reaches the ocean, no human power is required. Let it alone and the wind will take care of it. One day's navigation, thus left to itself in the high seas, will surely be more than equal to 100 years of human laboring while still in the shadows. And the Bodhisattva, accumulating the great stock of good deeds, sails out onto the great ocean of Bodhisattvahood. One moment of effortless activity will infinitely surpass deeds of conscious striving. There's no need to say any more about the attributes of the celestial Bodhisattva, except that when formulated, they seem at times rather paradoxical and self-contradictory. The Bodhisattva is both active in the sense that results are produced and inactive in the sense that he himself does nothing. He is both the same as ordinary people and yet quite different from them. He is all benevolent and almighty, and yet unable to save many of those whom he wants to save because of their invincible ignorance, and so on. Then a couple of footnotes here. First, on that the celestial Bodhisattva has no solid, putrid, and perishable body, but a dharmic body, which is issued from the Dharmadhatu, and which has the ability to conjure up fictitious physical bodies. They're called nirmitas, which go to all parts of the world. And the footnote says, they also go to the states of woe. For in the developed Mahayana, the stress is on the unselfish benevolence of a bodhisattva, led to a modification of the irreversibility in the first sense. Just because the bodhisattva is so pure on the higher stages, he can voluntarily and of his own free will appear to be reborn among those beings in the lower realms, so as to comfort them. And then this other footnote on, there's no need to say any more about the attributes of the celestial bodhisattva, except that when formulated, they seem at times rather paradoxical and self-contradictory. And Kanzi's footnote says, an interesting parallel is the Christian doctrine of the communicatio idiomatum, which deliberately ascribed irreconcilable attributes to the person of Christ. Anyway, gives a citation. Okay, so that's a lot of reading, a lot of having to just sit and listen. That can be hard. But I was just so struck by how here we are doing this Omye Dharma Dharani again and again and again, and the practical, down-to-earth history of it. You can just imagine it, Shariputra and Maudgalyayana desperately wanting to find a teacher, taking this vow that they won't stop. And can you imagine, just in the crowd in Rajgir, suddenly Maudgalyayana just sees this man, Ashvajit, and, something powerful was brimming up in him, you could see, because it was even the sight that was already triggering the development of his mind. Then that simple question, who are you? Who is your teacher and what does he teach? He already knew. He was like on the threshold of making his discovery. And Ashvajit, I'm amazing, and Arhat, and saying, well, I'm just a beginner. I so love that. I so love that. I think this is what's so, if your eyes are open just a little bit, it gets easier and easier to have confidence, faith in Buddha's teachings. Because one, that natural kind of humility, the fact that it starts, this great path that the Tibetans have laid out, or the Indians did for the Tibetans rather, of renunciation, compassion, then wisdom. Starting renunciation, it just seems so healthy to me. Instead of just motoring on with all our stupidity and all our machinations and all our manipulations and all our desires and attachments and greeds and aversions and the whole mess of it. Instead, this simple renunciation. And that's what Maudgalyayana experienced. Here suddenly was this man, and he just, like a child wanting to learn, who is your teacher and what does he teach? And then the response, again, it kind of met that renunciation with, well, I'm just a beginner. And yet the power of his words, so simple, cause and effect. He teaches the causes. What are the causes? Wouldn't it be good to know? And then also the elimination of the causes, because the whole thing is imperfect. And that's true liberation. So we repeat those words, every time we do the practice, and it's kind of inculcated in us and, leads directly to the five paths. Pretty special, I think. Okay, I think that's enough for us tonight. Anything from anybody before we conclude? Got. Mhm. So this is from one of the great Gelugpa scholars, Minyak Kunzan Sonam. I don't know much about him, but in this great commentary on Shantideva's work, entering the Bodhisattva path, in accordance with the intention of the Buddhas and Nagarjuna, I have relied on the text explained by the Bodhisattvas and explained it in simple terms for the sake of beginners. However, the meaning of the text is profound and hard to understand, and I am poorly trained and of feeble intellect. Whatever I have corrupted by the stains of my immature mind, I therefore confess from my heart to those who have, the eye of Dharma. If I might have done the slightest good thing, which has arisen from the strength of my intention, may it cause all beings to enter this excellent and profound path and be able to hold without exception the sacred Dharma of the conquerors. May I, too, gain a good support for practice throughout the series of my births, and in order to grasp the profound meaning of transcendent wisdom, so difficult to fathom, may I be able to give up my body and life and become the equal of the Bodhisattva Sadaprarudita. May the sun of the doctrine of transmission and realization shine brighter and brighter. May the supreme holders of the doctrine of transmission and realization increase their activities. May those who hold the jeweled treasure of transmission and realization increase the Sangha, and may all be auspicious for spreading the practice and study of transmission and realization. May every last one be free. Swaha. Okay. Thank you.